Eamon Ryan, leader of the Green Party, possibly in the next government, has come to join us in our series of interviews with party leaders. So best of luck with the general election campaign.
Thank you,
Thank you very much for coming in, and
Glad
you've
to
taken
hear.
so much of your time. After election day, if you believe all the pundits, the Greens are going to do very well. Any predictions on seats? Last week in our newspaper, I, in my very amateur way, predicted something around 9 seats. Will you do better than that?
I would hope we will get into double figures. I mean, and you have to, this up to the electorate. I've been saying consistently for several years that we needed at least 6 seats, because that gives you certain, there's 1 in 20 Irish people voting for you. It gives you a bit of strength, political capital to be able to do whatever you want to do in opposition or in government. I think with the polls and with just our sense of what sells around the country, I think we'll do better. I hope so. We're running in every single constituency. We have a really good team of candidates, 40% women, 60% men. And I think the critical thing for us is winning outside Dublin as well as in Dublin. I think around the country.
Where in particular would you see as having, and I'm just asking a good chance, I'm not asking to make a solid prediction, outside of Dublin? I was
out in Meath, Meath East. We have a huge campaign running there with Sean McCabe. I was in Athlone with Louise Heaven and Westmeath, like places we wouldn't historically been seen to have a chance. And I think it goes right around the country.
Mark Deary.
Mark and Louth is a real chance, 5-seater. Stephen Matthews on the other side in Wicklow. I was in Waterford.
Simon Harris, between you and I, is very worried about Stephen Matthews in Wicklow.
Good. I'm glad to hear it.
He's doing very well there. Well, not for himself, but for others.
But he's capable. He's been a councillor for 6 years. He's well regarded. He's an example, and we have people like that all over the country. So we have a really good campaign running. We have a lot of people out. Our membership has doubled in the last year. Our number of councillors has quadrupled. I'd like to see similar sort of levels of increase in the number of TDs.
If you look at the 3 TDs you have, yourself, Catherine Martin, and Joe O'Brien was recently elected, they're in constituencies where there is a certain socio-economic group, people who it could be felt that have dealt with a lot of vicissitudes in life and can now worry about polar bears and all those important issues. How will you convince people in rural Ireland? For instance, you know, you've had your critics recently. John Paul Phelan is claimed to have called some Green Party members nutters. I think he's aiming at a particular rural constituency. How can you convince people you're not anti-rural Ireland?
I think one of the best people to answer that is Pippa Hackett, who's our candidate in Laois Offaly. She's a farmer. She comes from Mayo originally, but she's a really good farmer. And she knows a lot about that aspect of rural life. Now, there are other aspects. We've a colleague, Roisin Garvey in Clare. She's done brilliant work in very rural areas about green flags in schools, getting kids cycling to school, local enterprise. Like her family is running all sorts of businesses. So it's that example. It's people who are actually doing it in rural Ireland is the way we do it. And that's why I think it's really important for us that some of those get elected, because they can speak best to that constituency and they are showing by example the sort of change, the leap we need to make. Pippa is kind of is an example for farmers because they know they can talk to her and she can talk their language in terms of, this is how it works. This is how we can make a living from this in a way that's better than the other system where people are getting paid really badly.
And if those seats come in, do you agree with the general view that you'll be power brokers, that you could be in a coalition? And if you are in that coalition, would you look for some other cabinet roles besides the last time, the 2007-2011 government, when you were in communications and environment? Would you see yourself, for instance, in the Department of Finance? Could you see yourself in education, some of those other departments, if you were to be called to government?
I think anyone who's speculating now what job they might have is a bit presumptive.
No, but a Green Party cabinet minister in the future being in finance.
You got to get first get elected. But can I say one thing? I do. This is my personal view. We're facing a climate and biodiversity crisis. The people know that now. Everyone can see it. Australia burning in front of our eyes. The next decade is critical in addressing it. In my mind, that then leads me to think, well, if you have the chance, and I believe in our democratic constitutional systems, the system that the state has, if you have a chance then to go in and to influence how government works, then I personally, my experiences and my advice to our members is, well, we should try and do that. As to which particular roles, well, that's something you only decide after the election. but it has to be central to the next government's plans. And it has to be central not just because we'd be coming in, but this is where the economy is going. Like the European Union has just said, their whole strategy is a European Green Deal. They just funded a €1 trillion program last week to say this is where we're going. If we don't make the leap and we keep going to where we're going, we'll be facing hundreds of millions fines every year for being laggards, not leaders. And I think last but not least, the Irish people, I think, are ready to lead. They've been listening to the science. They've been watching David Attenborough. They've been listening to Greta Thunberg. I think actually they know and they want to be good at this, and we will be good at this. And our job is to provide practical solutions to help make it happen. It's not to be wagging our fingers at people, and it's not to just be exclusive ownership of it. For this to work, we need all political parties to agree that this is the direction Ireland is going, and we do it for 2 or 3 governments in a row, not just one. And that's the sort of long-term thinking we're bringing to this election.
And you've been there before.
Yeah.
You're back out in the doorsteps. Some of the pain has receded, I think, for people in Ireland. The memory of it, perhaps, but. Are you still hearing, you know, Fianna Fáil get it deservedly for their participation in that government between 2007 and 2011 for some of the things that happened? Do you still get and hear that pain on the doorsteps from people who went through that era in Ireland?
Yeah, I do, and it was for the whole country. It was a deeply traumatic period in our country's history. But I'll be honest, one of the things I'm noticing, I was out the other day out in Bull Island, we were doing a piece, and I met a young person, and I said, I was talking to them, and they said they're heading off to Vancouver. I said, why? Okay, Vancouver's a great place, but why are you heading to Vancouver? Well, it's too expensive to live here at the moment. So I think the real critical thing for this election, I thought the debate last night was somewhere looking back a bit too much. We need to look forward. And we need to look forward where we answer to the question, particularly to that age group in their 20s, 30s, early 40s, who are finding it, that for all the economy doing well, they find it increasingly difficult to do what their parents were able to do, set up home, have a really high quality of life where they're not commuting all the time, being able to spend time with their children, be able to spend time with their friends. That's what we need to focus on now. Where are we going from here? We need to learn the lessons from the past. We don't kind of get our budget off wrong, we don't get a housing bubble. But real questions today is, how do we get good value in our public services so that health and education work really well? How do we provide our young people affordable homes? And anyone who thinks we can get the answer to that by looking back, I think is missing the big picture. We have to look forward and do things in a different way. And we would bring all our experience to that and provide the solutions as best we can.
You touched on something there which I often feel, there's so much discussion about a housing crisis, which none of us doubt here, but there's a transport crisis. There's large spaces of green area in Ireland which could be built on, and if you have said so many times we need proper infrastructure and public transport. Have you any radical views on how we build that? You know, I know IBEC have come forward and said at a time of historically low interest rates, we could borrow to build our infrastructure. Have you any? Would you agree with that? Do you see any other radical ways we can fund public transport?
No, I think we're right. I mean, the head of the lending in the European Investment Bank, Andrew McDowell, was in Dublin last week meeting I met him at the same time I met the European Commission President, and he was tearing his hair out. He's saying, I can't find people to lend to here. They're looking to, we don't have a single big public transport project in planning.
Yeah,
like
why
not
is that?
one. Because
fear of what has happened in
because it
recent
hasn't
times?
because it hasn't been prioritised. It hasn't been. We haven't been willing to be ambitious, and it's the same in energy. It's the same in a variety of different areas where the investments are actually. This is the biggest crisis. It's our infrastructure shortage. We don't have the proper transport system in place. We don't have the wastewater and energy systems, and we don't have the housing. And on all of those, that's the priority for the next 10 years. It's investing in our long-term future by building the sort of basic, what I call it, the kind of plumbing of society, you know, the basic infrastructure that helps us move around, have a safe, secure, warm and efficient home, and all the other services you need to tackle climate change. So that's the priority. It's capital spending and innovative, efficient and fast-acting public services is we need political parties to set as their goal in the next 5 years. I
wouldn't be normally in the habit of asking this question, but it has become a talking point since last night. Leo Varadkar was asked about his use of illegal drugs. You have spoken about that in the past. I'm not going to go into that. You've said that you had smoked cannabis, correct? But I also recall that you discussed the legalisation of drugs in certain ways. How would you see that work? I'm always wary of how exactly, because I just think there's a bit of a contradiction there. We're talking about banning smoking essentially, yet we're talking about legalising something that isn't generally available. How would you see something like that work?
You've got to be very careful, because you've got to be very careful of medical advice and of looking at risks that could be associated with. What we've been saying consistently is we should really follow a medical approach, follow a health approach, rather than currently we're stuck in a criminal justice approach. And the criminal justice approach isn't working. And it isn't working because it's the gangs who are getting all the money and kind of all the gang wars, these horrific murders are a knock-on consequence of some of that kind of current approach. So I think it has to be health-based. You've got to be really careful in terms, particularly with younger people, particularly with the potential effects on kind of if young people are consuming drugs, but they are at the moment. And I think a health-based approach where we really set that as a parameter is where we should go.
If there's a coalition, who would you prefer?
One of the things I've been saying consistently, and it's still the same, this change we need to make is so big to tackle climate change. For the better, we have to change into our transport system, our land use system, our energy system, our waste system, industrial system. We will not make this leap if we do it as a divisive project, if we do it as urban versus rural or left versus right or young versus old. It'll work best. We work well as a country when we come together with collective conscious or collective consensus. Yeah, we're going to be good at this. That then leads you, if you believe that, well, I'm not going to get the whole country behind this. If I'm saying to some of the people that they vote for, I'm not going to talk to you, what does that say to the voters who voted for them? And I think, and look at what's happened in Australia, like their climate politics is a mess. Same in America, because they've made it this divisive issue. I prefer for us all to work on this collectively. And that leads me to saying, I'll work with all parties. And we've been doing that for the last many years, but particularly the last 2 or 3 years. We set up the Citizens Assembly on Climate Change to bring the public in for their advice. We then helped set up the all-party Oireachtas Committee looking at the issue, and that worked collectively. And we do the same. It's working it's the right approach, and I think actually that's what the Irish people want. They don't want us just fighting. They want us to start to deliver and help deliver some of the changes, because I think the Irish people want to go green, and that should belong to every Irish person, no matter who they vote for.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Eamon Ryan. Best of luck in the campaign trail.
Thanks indeed, John.
Thank you.